Today, everyone knows about the console wars between PlayStation and Xbox, and Nintendo's ongoing battles. But before all of this, there was a company that completely changed the gaming industry. SEGA, the company that terrified Nintendo and created one of the most iconic characters in gaming history, Sonic. But suddenly, everything collapsed. The consoles failed, millions were lost, and a market once dominated by SEGA vanished. So what happened? Was it a massive failure or a conspiracy that led to the empire's fall? This is the story of SEGA, from the top to just a memory.
Welcome! This is Chrono from Hysterious Files. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's begin the story. In the early 1990s, the streets of American cities reflected a new reality in the world of home entertainment. If you walked into a video game store in New York or Los Angeles back then, you would see shelves stacked with Nintendo consoles and children smiling as they talked about their adventures in Super Mario or The Legend of Zelda. It felt as if Nintendo was the absolute ruler of the gaming world, untouchable by any rival. But suddenly, new posters began appearing in shop windows, bold advertisements with striking colors, carrying the name Sega Genesis and featuring a fast blue character called Sonic. With remarkable courage, Sega decided to declare war on Nintendo, even though the battle seemed as uneven as a small fighter facing a mythical giant. Sega was clever. Instead of relying on a massive advertising budget like Nintendo, it chose a provocative and direct approach. Its message to teenagers was simple. Nintendo games are for kids, but we make games for grown-ups. That message struck hard, especially in America, where teens were eager for something edgier than Mario's innocent world. In popular gaming magazines like GamePro and Electronic Gaming Monthly, Sonic started to appear on the covers. He wasn't just a video game character, he was becoming a cultural icon. Imagine walking into a store and finding not only Sonic games, but also Sonic t-shirts, even Sonic-branded breakfast cereal. Kids begged their parents for a Genesis console just to experience Sonic's world. Even major retailers like Walmart, who had been reluctant to sell Sega consoles for fear of angering Nintendo, eventually gave in, placing Sega and Nintendo on the same shelves for the first time. In 1991, something unthinkable happened. Sega outsold Nintendo in the US, shipping more than 1.6 million units. This victory ignited a price war. Nintendo dropped its console price from $200 to $180, while Sega slashed Genesis prices from $149 to just $100. On American streets, the debate was alive every day. Which console will you buy? The childhood favorite Nintendo, or the cool new Sega for teens? And Sega didn't stop at Sonic. They launched a sequel featuring a new character, Miles Tails Prower, the twin-tailed fox who could fly. The game shattered records, selling more than 800,000 copies in a single day. Newspapers called it Sega Mania. But behind the scenes, a larger game was unfolding. Sony, the Japanese electronics giant, began seriously considering entering the video game industry. At first, Sony tried partnering with Sega on a joint console called the Sega PlayStation. Sony would provide CD-ROM technology, and Sega would bring its gaming expertise. But internal disagreements killed the project. Sony then turned to Nintendo, leading to an agreement on a Nintendo PlayStation. But Nintendo made a historic mistake. At the last moment, they betrayed Sony and announced a partnership with Philips, Sony's biggest rival in the electronics market. This betrayal fueled Sony's determination for revenge, and the result was the legendary PlayStation. During these years, Nintendo doubled down on its family-friendly identity, keeping its games free of blood and extreme violence. Sega, however, targeted teenagers directly with shocking, violent games like Mortal Kombat. Teens, Sega instantly became the cool console, while Nintendo was dismissed as being for kids. Yet, despite its success, Sega's missteps began to pile up. The company launched the Sega CD, promising revolutionary experiences. Instead, players got low-quality interactive movies far below expectations. Meanwhile, Nintendo released the Super Nintendo, packed with legendary titles like Super Mario World and The Legend of Zelda, reclaiming part of the market. Still, Sega pressed forward. They launched the Sega Saturn in hopes of crushing Sony's upcoming PlayStation. But Sega made fatal mistakes. The console was notoriously difficult for developers, rushed to market without a strong game library, and suffered from poor marketing. Worst of all, Sega underestimated Sony, treating them as an amateur electronics company while focusing their attacks on Nintendo. All the while, Sony was preparing a knockout blow. In 1994, Sony released the PlayStation in Japan, and a year later in the US and Europe. At $299, it was cheaper than the Saturn, which cost $399. But the difference wasn't just price, it was the games. Sony attracted top developers and launched with a strong library, including hits like Final Fantasy and Tekken. PlayStation games felt more realistic, more immersive, and more appealing than Sega's offerings. The shock in the American market was undeniable. Kids who had been playing Sonic just yesterday were now spending endless hours on PlayStation. The media described it as a revolution in entertainment. Sega, once the queen of the market, was quickly falling. In 1998, Sega tried to stage a comeback with the Dreamcast. It was a groundbreaking console, the first to support online gaming. Critics praised it, and early sales looked promising. But then Sony delivered another fatal blow: the announcement of the PlayStation 2. Almost instantly, excitement for the Dreamcast evaporated. Consumers decided to wait for the PS2, especially after Sony revealed it would double as both a gaming console and a DVD player. At that time, DVD players were very expensive. Suddenly, you could get both in one device. The result? The Dreamcast was ignored. Major developers abandoned Sega and shifted their focus entirely to Sony. Sales collapsed, and in 2001, Sega officially announced it was exiting the hardware business, transforming into a software-only publisher. It was the end of a golden era, and the fall of the only company that had ever truly shaken Nintendo's throne. But Sega's story didn't truly end there. Its legacy lived on. Characters like Sonic remained beloved worldwide. Franchises like Yakuza and Persona proved that Sega could still innovate even without building consoles. And even today, when we see Sonic's image or hear a classic Sega melody, we are transported back to the golden days of the 1990s. And that was the rise and fall of Sega. Thank you for watching, and if you'd like to see more stories like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next episode.